firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to thank Anne, Michael and Glenn for all their work in organising this, and thank them for inviting me to speak. So what I'm going to talk about, we've heard a lot about the top-down picture, what's happening with reform and government and big picture sort of directions. And what we're going to talk about today is the organisation, our organisations, organisational capacity. And sometimes I think about this job in this context. We're trying to prepare ourselves to catch a ball. And if I think about the earlier conversation, we're trying to catch a ball, but we kind of know where it's coming from, but we're not 100% sure. And really the key message is we can prepare to catch the ball even though we're not exactly sure where it's coming from. And the real key message is it's absolutely imperative to start now. There's no reason to wait until we have all the definitive answers. What I've been doing over the last number of years is working with organizations, predominantly these organizations in the broadly defined human services or community sectors, all of them going through a massive amount of change. And the one thing that I cannot emphasize enough is the organizations that wait for definitive answers land up in trouble. The organizations that start preparing now put their faith, in a sense, in a change journey, even if they don't have all the answers, but are in the change journey. Those are the organizations that build competitive and sustainable strategies. No one knows the answers now, none of us in this room, but that's no reason not to start the journey and begin exploring and begin developing strategies and responses to all the things that change in the world around us. So starting just with a bit of repetition, I'm afraid, we've all heard about this massive reform in hack, aging, disability sectors. Won't go through all that. It's also over the last decade been going on in other sectors. Well, you know, there's a lot going on in health. We've just seen a real big reform in specialist homelessness services, and I want to tell you a little bit about that because I think there are lessons we can learn from other sectors. And the other one we haven't spoken enough about is lots of change going on in the not-for-profit policy framework, both at the productivity level, Productivity Commission and Commonwealth level, but also in New South Wales, there has been quite a bit of work about how government procures services from the not-for-profit sector. And there are a couple of very general messages that are coming across in policy and funding directions from government that can inform our strategies, our responses as service delivery organizations. So to summarize, I will try a lot of the reform stuff. I've got this slide which talks about the context, the key policy and funding challenges. And the reason I raise them in those 5 sort of colored boxes is what I'm really trying to think about and what I'm hoping this workshop will do in your conversation after my presentation is think about these as questions that we need to develop organizational responses to. Each organization represented here that wants to be competitive and sustainable, that wants to thrive in the future, needs to develop its own bundle of strategic responses to these changes, to this changing environment. So what are they? If we think about them in terms of what are their implications for us as organizations. Well, the first one is choice. Choice and control, and that's all about the person-centered model. So that's really about what are our responses to a service model or a model of care, if you like, that is about ensuring that the end user has choice and control. Second question is obviously this whole idea of wellness and re-ablement, okay? We need to ensure that similarly our service models reflect that restorative approach, that wellness approach. One thing I need to stress as I get to the end of the second point is I certainly would hate to pretend we're starting from a blank slate in the sense that home mods actually starts really well in relation to these 2 key challenges. Home mods historically and by definition is obviously focused on enabling people to stay at home and is obviously well, that's at the heart of much of what we're building on. So when we do strategy for organizations, we're obviously thinking about playing to our strengths and building on them. The third one I've got there is competition. Absolutely critical. This is going to be such a real change, but we have time. It's competition for clients, and it's competition for government funding. And the question we're going to have to ask in the new service models that our organizations develop is, how do we win clients and how do we win tenders? Are we confident that the way we have defined our service models, the way we have defined our, if you like, value proposition, our service quality, we are the ones that are going to win the clients we want and win the tenders we want? There's uncertainty. Some of those tenders may start in 2015. You know, there's a lot we don't know, but these things we do know. We may not know exactly when, but we know that we're going to have to win clients sooner or later and win tenders in one way or another. The fourth one I've got there is compliance, quality, and accountability. Now, all of that stuff, if you look at the other sectors, if you look broadly at the government trends, what we are seeing is, whatever the sector, government is playing a less direct role in service provision. We heard that. We heard in a New South Wales story earlier this morning about shifting the whole community care sector to the service delivery side, to the NGO side. But what they're doing, and we've seen it in community housing, specialist homelessness services, aged care, all the new institutions in health, is as they dish out the service delivery function away from government to the NGO sector, government is building stronger, more robust, more rigorous, more demanding compliance, quality, and accountability frameworks. And of course, they're going to be looking for the organizations that can meet and comply, and that's part of our capacity to compete. And the final one is changing patterns in actually the way funding happens. We heard all this morning, but it's happening all across the country in all the sectors. In most sectors, it's rationalizing the funding streams. It's value for money. Value for money means we have to give a number for a particular thing. It'll cost this much to do this particular thing. And not only can we show the unit cost of this particular thing, but we could also show that our particular strategy to resolve a particular problem achieves the best value for money for that particular outcome. So I've got a client in clients in other sectors who are starting to do evidence-based evaluation to put into their tenders or to demonstrate to government. They're saying the big outcome, let's say in your case, the big outcome is enabling somebody to live independently. Government wants evidence for value for money. Our particular intervention costs this amount, it achieves that outcome, therefore we can demonstrate value for money. What else have I got there? I've got obviously fee for service. By definition, we're going to have, we've got fee for service however it works, either self-funded people with individualized funding, and that implies that new kinds of capabilities and systems, many of which you have or are in your organizations, but we need to be way tighter, and those things there's going to be more and more need to enhance those sorts of capabilities. So, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take the big stories we hear about policy and funding directions from government, turn them into a bundle of ideas, and say, okay, what do we do about those things practically to empower our own organizations for the future and to assure we are both sustainable and competitive? So, the key things that we're going to discuss in terms of organizational responses are in your program. Those are the 6 headings in your program. And the way the afternoon is going to work is Glenn is going to facilitate a session where we talk about all of those questions. So I'm going to go through each one of those as a stimulus to get the conversation going. Why is it a stimulus? Well, because just like you, I don't have the answers. None of us have the answers. And I think the most important message that I say again, I stress, is that's okay. I sit in these change journeys with clients, and we start with a discussion, and gradually directions emerge and action emerges. And it's really about being committed to being in the change journey and actually doing stuff and starting to change. So this is really, hopefully, a contribution to that journey. So moving on to the first one, it's responding effectively to person-centered and consumer-directed approaches. So the way I've started that question, and what does an organization do in terms of repositioning itself strategically It's a new world we're in a sense, to some degree, person-centered, consumer-directed, recognizing that home mods, to a large degree, is kind of already does a lot of these things, is we need to start being much more focused on exactly who our possible clients are. And that's going to be the basis for starting to choose which clients our organizations seek to prioritize. And the way I like to think about that is segmentation, or breaking them up into categories and trying to work out who our priority customers are, who our priority clients are. There's older people with individualized funding, younger people. There's people who are going to be home support package eligible. There's people who are going to be self-funded. There are going to be people in big urban areas. There are going to be people in remote areas. You know, there's all kinds of ways to think about the needs that we want to meet as an organization. The place to start is work out what are those different needs out there, which are the needs we prioritize. But we need to broaden the way we think about those needs in this new environment. We also need to think about the people who perhaps will subcontract our services, the people who will perhaps make referrals to us. You know, those could be the home care package service providers. Those could be the fee-for-service home care service providers. And I know of stories already where I'm involved in examples where I've got clients who are setting up new home care services. And they're saying, we want to, just like you, we want to be around for the long term, we want to thrive. And the way we need to do that is start setting up new services. So setting up a new home care service, for example, saying, well, we can send people, carers, support workers, to go into other people's homes, but we need a network of suppliers. We need a network of people who we can refer to. We, as the home care service with a bit of a case management and assessment function, are needing to recommend other people. And I already know of organizations like yours who are out there marketing themselves to be the ones who are recommended. So when we talk about our sector, we have a sector called the home mods, or home mods and maintenance, but we also have a sector called the related and supporting industries around us. And when we do the analysis of ourselves and the target clients we want, we both think about the individual end consumers and all of those in the related and supporting industries who we want to like us and to refer people to us. So once you've done that analysis, and I'll talk more about the choices because I'm doing work in other sectors where we see clients, where we see organizations choosing, this is what the words I use, choosing where to position themselves in the market. That means what kinds of priority clients do we want? You know, we'll talk more about the different kinds of service models or business models each one of you can choose. Emphasize the point, it's not just about home mods. It could be about a multi-service outlet. It could be about all other kinds of service mixes and so on. We'll talk about that a little bit more. The other piece of responding effectively to person-centered and consumer-directed approaches that I'd like to note is this idea of process improvement. I kind of stepped back and thought about this. What are organizations doing to be more person-centered, more responsive to the needs of the end user? This question of what exactly do we need to do to ensure that as far as is possible, a person we work with is empowered to have control, make their own choices. Don't feel like they're having a solution imposed on them, but feel they're truly in a plan, in a framework where they are making decisions and choices, and where they are in a plan which enables them to restore maintain capabilities, restore capabilities they used to but no longer have, and the like. And it sounds kind of simple, but what I tend to see as I look around other sectors is it really boils down to process improvement and training. Process improvement is, let's just look at the things we do. Somebody visits our service, or we have that first point of contact. There's the point of contact. There's the sort of, assessment and planning. There's the service delivery. And then there's some sort of follow-up and QA. And really, what organizations tend to do at this stage in terms of person-centeredness and consumer-directed approaches on that level is make sure that they review and revise their processes to ensure they are client-focused and the like. I'll talk more about the business side of that and so on, but just in terms of the client's experience being a person-centered experience which promotes wellness, well-being, etc. I think it boils down to process improvement and then training of the staff to implement those sorts of processes. Moving on to service models as the next one, the way we frame this talk is it's about uncertainty and competition, and therefore what sorts of service models do we need that are sustainable and competitive? If those are the things we're worried about in a world where there's rapid change and uncertainty, we need a business model that makes us feel it's solid. We're standing on something that is solid, not vulnerable. And that's really, what does sustainability mean and what does competitive mean? Thinking about sustainability, you just got two simple ideas. The one that I'm seeing to make an organization sustainable is this idea of diversification. Kind of obvious. Do you put all your eggs in one basket or not? And really, that's what diversification is, simply put. Organizations, businesses, whatever we want to call them, the ones that have all their eggs in one basket are vulnerable, they're exposed. If one thing goes, they're in trouble. If you diversify it with products, services, markets, different kinds, diversification enables you to be sustainable. The second idea there is making the most of existing resources. So that's really this idea of being adaptive and cost-effective. There's the possibility for organizations to expand, to diversify the things they do, but use the core skills they have in more versatile ways. So instead of having people narrowly focused on one piece of the puzzle, get those people focused more broadly. I mean, I've got a simple example of an organization that's just restructured in the context of this. It does sort of social support kind of area, but they've basically split up their homelessness work, their aging work, their disability work, and their neighborhood center work. But really, they've made the processes and the skills quite uniform across their organization. So as funding for one goes up, they can move people into it, and as it goes down, they can move people across. So it's about doing a few more things and having a versatile workforce. Simple idea, but sometimes we get caught in our little silos, and our silos are vulnerable. So it's about moving away from that. What are the sorts of strategies? Well, each organization has its own story. And I at one stage tried to think of maybe I can make a bit of a menu, but I can't. So just a few ideas, and you use your story and your change journey to work out how you want to position yourself, what your service model is. And, there's a whole range of possible competitive service strategies that we all know and see around us. There's the integrated service model, where there's multiple interrelated services. There's scale, where we get bigger to make ourselves more efficient, to get economies of scale and the like. So that's the sort of let's grow. People would say in our sector there's a strong push to grow, to have the capacity to do the kinds of things that we need to do, say from a government accountability point of view, from an efficient, cost-effective back office point of view, to be able to tender competitively on economies of scale, those kinds of things. A third example I've got there is niche-based. I had a really interesting presentation from somebody in England who came to Australia talking about the sorts of reforms that hit us. They hit them in the late 70s. So they said, well, the reforms are different, but they're kind of the same. There's some similarities. So 30 years later, what is the story in the UK? And it was fascinating to hear that story because, the reform is different. I'm not suggesting it's the same, but 30-year hindsight is really interesting. And they said, you know what, there are small organizations around, but none of them are not-for-profit. The only small organizations that still exist in the UK 30 years down the line are for-profit, premium quality, niche-based organizations. that charge a lot of money for their services and are very, very commercial. Most of the not-for-profit sector, what exists in the UK, and I don't think we're threatened in the same way they were in England, but it's the organisations that are big, that have grown. We'll talk more about scale. But so I don't want to say there isn't a role for niche-based organisations, because I think there is, and we certainly heard ADAC telling us today that it's not just big, that there's place for small, but we've got to think about that critically when it comes to making sure, because you are the owners of your own long-term sustainability. You know, there are other kinds of niche in your sectors, whether they be specialist builder skills or specialist OT skills or whatever. I don't know the answers, and the answers will emerge from yourselves and from your own stories. Okay. How much? I've got another 10-ish. Yeah, okay. So then the next question was critical mass and scale and reach. So I've kind of begun speaking about this. And remember, this is a segue from the previous slide, which is about positioning ourselves to be sustainable. And in order to be sustainable, we've got to compete. We've got to win the money and we've got to win the clients. Because if we don't, somebody else will. Not right or wrong, just is. So let's think a little bit. And I certainly don't know the right answers about scale, and probably none of us do. But if we firstly start off with some lessons from other sectors, what we've certainly seen in the other sectors, well, I'll talk about a few in a second, is that there is, in my mind, there is no doubt from other sectors, not saying home mods, other sectors, that smaller organizations tend not to thrive if they're government funded. And if they're government funded, the days of the regional monopoly of a block funding for a discrete area that you kind of own are over. They might not be over today, but they will be over soon. So, the way in which, in those contexts, we can suggest, the lessons suggest, that the organizations who look to government funding for a lot of their sustainability will probably need to look at growth and some form of consolidation, whether it be mergers or partnership or whatever. I'm not pushing that. I'm just telling you what I've seen in other sectors. I've just spent a lot of time with the SHS, Specialist Homelessness Services Reforms. Same sort of thing came from FACS, similar policy settings, different service, but coming from the same place, if you like. Well, the organizations that won most of the tenders were either in big partnerships, and generally they were led by very big faith-based service providers. You look at that thing and you see, you know, St. Vincent de Paul, Mission Australia, all over the tender results. I had clients who were fantastic, very small refuges, domestic violence, drug and alcohol, you know, people who have been made homeless or at risk of homeless, like just the most wonderful organizations, sort of people who, I worked with them and helped, you know, angels, but gone. You know, their refuges are going to be sucked up into the large, big faith-based service providers. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I stress that, I'm saying it just is. Social housing. I don't know how many of you have followed the social housing reforms over the last decade. I sort of started looking at social housing work, say, around 2003 in New South Wales, where they were looking at this idea of preferred growth providers. Same thing. They got a policy called preferred growth providers. So those were the organizations that had enough scale to invest capital in redevelopment to create more housing stock. And so 10 years down the line, the preferred growth providers have grown dramatically, and the actual numbers, the volume of housing has grown, but the numbers of service providers has shrunk. Similarly, aged care. I had an interesting exercise for one of my aged care clients. I looked at the Doha, now DSS data, over a 3-year period of all the organizations in New South Wales that had won residential and community packages. Over a 3-year period in the late 2010s, whatever, sort of about 2008, sort of 2009 to 2012 approximately, the numbers went down by 20 providers a year. There were around 360 when I started looking at it, and over a 3-year period they went down to 300. just is. So if your focus is government funding at the heart of your ongoing sustainability, and we don't know what's going to happen post-2018 with individualized funding, scale will be a very important part of your competitive position, I think. That's what the evidence tells us. But home mods is different. There definitely is space for the organizations that focus on fee for service. And a lot of your work is going to be in the fee for service space, the individualized funding. I certainly appreciate that. The way to compete, one would imagine, is to think about it if one is going for a sort of smaller, more focused, niche-based strategy. And I'm certainly not suggesting one or the other. Heaven forbid that I can. But one thing I think we do know is that a sustainable and competitive niche organization, whether it be niche geographically or niche in terms of its core business, will need to be very competitive in its particular chosen space. And there's many niche positions, as I said. There's geographical niche, there's sector expertise, there's knowing about particular things, there could be assessments, there could be certain kinds of building work. I don't know what they are. The penultimate, I think. I've still got a few. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit faster. Marketing. Marketing is an important discipline. If we want to compete and win, well, we need to tell people we're out there, and we need to make pretty sure that they choose us. So we need a marketing framework. We need to have a service model, already spoken about that, have a service model that clearly defines who are the priority needs we meet, the customers we want, whether they be end users or larger referrers, larger clients, big home care services, whatever. We need to go and talk to them. What are your needs? How do people like that find us? How do they come to us? What drives their decisions? How are they going to choose? We actually do that. So analysis, the reason I put those two words up is market analysis is who are the customers, and then research is going to them and saying, what do you want? And based on knowing who the target markets are and what they want, we then develop our branding and our messages, and we then get out there. It's the networking, the promoting, the information, etc. When you do the branding and the messages, you're asking, what are the messages they would respond to? What information would they like? How to communicate with them, and what is the kind of brand that's most appealing. Not rocket science. That's why I say if you embark on the journey and do the right things, you'll get there. It's not rocket science. Doing it is the rocket science. The next one I've got is changes needed to services admin and finance systems. I've got to add a few more points to that slide, and I will before Michael puts it up on the website. Had a quick word with him about making a few edits. It's this whole, what kind of back office do we need to enable a competitive organization that wins? And what are the things we need to look at? Well, there's the quality system stuff we've spoken. Remember how I spoke about right at the beginning what government is doing and how government is kind of redefining its role from provider to actually regulator and overseer of the data and so on? Well, we need the quality, we need the capacity for increased and ongoing improvements in the quality systems, the accreditation, the reporting, I should add their data and management information, the unit costing and the business metrics, the compliance and the technology. In other words, all the stuff that we need to both make sure government chooses us, but we also know that the commercial metrics in our organization. Primarily unit costing, but also our own internal targets. How many widgets do we need to sell in order to get to where we want to be each month? Each management meeting, monitoring, are we meeting our targets? If we are, great. If we aren't, what do we do? Having some of the efficiency metrics, the things that any small business does. It's really about that. The strategic support is also really important. As I've said, I'm in quite a few of these journeys with other organizations, and one of the key trends that I'm seeing is that there's two major restructures going on in the admin in the organizations. And the one is about the admin and finance. I'm going to talk more about these in the next slide. The one is about the admin and finance, and the second is about strategic support, where you're looking for your ability to do strategy, service development, marketing, business development, being getting out there and finding customers, and customer service and QA. Customer service and QA being things like, client service. On the one hand, there's the case management, there's the assessment and planning sorts of functions, but there's the other side of that, which is in a more commercial environment referred to as account management, actually having a relationship with the client and make sure whether they're a big client or an end user, and make sure they are happy with the service they're getting, having some sort of relationship where you're managing the relationship and ensuring you've got a happy customer who's going to recommend you to everyone who asks. And so that takes me to the organizational structure slide, where there's a couple of ideas that I want to convey. The one is this idea of adaptive structures. I've spoken a lot about that already, but that's flexibility. It's this idea of being able to use people in different ways. So if there's more money and work in that area, you move your people over there. If there's less money in that area shrinks and the people move over somewhere else. It's sort of obvious, but so many of our organizations just don't do it. We've got people stuck in narrow silos and not very flexible and not very versatile. It's quite easy to do that in restructures, just by bringing different teams together and getting more uniform and standardized processes. So the adaptive structure focuses on So having said that, the adaptive, to do that, if you like, an adaptive structure needs a strategic leadership role where we separate the management function, a strategic leadership role where we're kind of trying to start separate two roles. The one is the function of making sure the services run efficiently, but the other is the function of strategic leadership being making sure that somebody is there looking at the environment we're in and doing business development in other markets. Do you see what I mean? I've just been in quite a few restructures where you've had one EO and they've chosen to split that into two roles, where on the one hand you have the person who's focused on operational efficiency and great service delivery, but on the other hand you've got someone who's focusing on the markets and the networks and the networking and bringing in and growing the business. The other main change is just strengthening the back office, strengthening the administration. The other thing that organizations also look at when they look at restructuring and organization structures is think really carefully about what do we want to do ourselves and what do we want other people to do for us. And that's the question of outsourcing. I'm going to leave it at that. I've summarized that last slide really quickly because I ran out of time, but it's really, I've made all the points about both having the leadership capacity, the business development, growing the business capacity, which is the leadership, the operational efficiency, improved and efficient service delivery, and a strong back office with all the compliance, the commercial metrics, the unit costing, all of that stuff. So 3 basic elements that people are strengthening in their new organizational structures. So that's it. I'll summarize one last point, which I've made a lot, but the answers don't happen at the beginning of this journey. The answers happen when you get together and go through a logical, practical process. Where do we want to be? How do we get there? You have the discussions, you do the research, and you gradually make some decisions that are appropriate to the amount of information we have. And as we get more information, our decisions become clearer and firmer.
Please thank Peter Cranko.